For decades, most gardeners in the United States have started spring the same way, by bringing out a rototiller and turning over the garden beds until the soil looks soft, loose, and perfectly clean. It's a habit passed down through generations. Our fathers did it. Their fathers did it. And many of us simply followed the same routine without ever asking if there might be a better way. But in some Amish farming communities, you'll notice something very different. They rarely use rototillers, yet their soil often becomes more fertile year after year. That raises an interesting question. Why don't Amish farmers till their soil? If you visit Amish communities in Pennsylvania or Ohio in early spring, when many gardens have freshly tilled beds, Amish gardens often look almost untouched. The soil hasn't been turned over at all. This contrast makes many people curious. Why would such an experienced farming community avoid rototillers when they are so common in modern gardening? The answer isn't just a different technique. It comes from a different way of understanding soil. For many Amish farmers, soil is not simply a place to grow plants. They see it as a living ecosystem that must be protected and nurtured over time. And that perspective has led them to develop a very different approach to gardening. To understand why they farm this way, we first need to ask a simple question. What is soil, really? Soil is not just dirt. For many years, people often thought of soil as nothing more than an inert material that holds plants in place. But modern soil science tells a very different story. A handful of healthy soil is actually a complex, living ecosystem. In just 1 teaspoon of fertile soil, scientists can find billions of bacteria, several feet of fungal threads, and countless other microscopic organisms. Alongside them are earthworms, soil insects, nematodes, and many other creatures quietly working beneath the surface. These organisms don't exist independently. Instead, they form a tightly connected biological network that helps maintain soil fertility and supports plant growth. For example, mycorrhizal fungi connect directly to plant roots and extend the plant's ability to absorb nutrients. Through this network, plants can access water and minerals far beyond the reach of their roots alone. At the same time, earthworms continuously tunnel through the soil. These tunnels create natural channels that allow rainwater to move deeper into the ground, improve airflow, and give plant roots space to grow. Meanwhile, bacteria and other microorganisms break down leaves, straw, and organic matter, converting them into nutrients that plants can absorb. When all of these processes work together, they create what soil scientists call healthy soil structure, a structure that can hold water, store air, and still drain properly after rainfall. That is the difference between living soil and inert dirt. But the problem begins when we use rototillers, which can disrupt this fragile ecosystem. What rototilling actually does to soil. When you use a rototiller, the soil surface becomes loose and soft. Visually, it looks like you've improved the soil and created a perfect bed for planting. But beneath the surface, several important processes in the soil ecosystem are being disrupted. First, the fungal networks in the soil are shredded. These fungal threads, especially mycorrhizal fungi, can extend for many feet through the soil and connect directly with plant roots. They function like a natural transportation system, helping plants access water and nutrients far beyond the reach of their roots. When rototilling cuts these networks apart, plants may need weeks or even months to rebuild them. Second, earthworm tunnels are destroyed. Earthworms travel through the soil and leave behind narrow channels that allow rainwater to move deeper into the ground and help air circulate. When the soil is aggressively tilled, these natural channels collapse and the soil often becomes compacted again after just a few heavy rains. Third, Many beneficial microorganisms are exposed to the surface, where harsh sunlight, dry air, and temperature changes can cause them to die or reduce their activity. And finally, rototilling brings dormant weed seeds to the surface. Many garden soils contain thousands of weed seeds that have remained buried for years. Once they are exposed to light, air, and moisture, they quickly begin to germinate. As a result, a freshly tilled bed may look clean for a few days, but in reality, it often becomes the perfect environment for weeds to explode in the following weeks. The Amish philosophy of soil stewardship. One of the key reasons Amish farmers approach soil differently from modern agriculture lies in a philosophy they call stewardship. The idea itself is simple, but it has a powerful influence on how they farm. From their perspective, people do not truly own the land. Instead, we are only temporary caretakers of it, responsible for keeping the soil healthy and fertile for the generations that will come after us. In other words, soil is not just meant to serve this year's harvest. It is meant to support many seasons and many generations. Because of this mindset, the questions they ask about farming are different. Instead of asking, "How can we prepare the soil as quickly as possible for this year's crops?" they tend to ask a different question. How can we make the soil better year after year? When soil is viewed from this long-term perspective, breaking apart its structure every spring with a rototiller begins to make much less sense. If soil is a living ecosystem that slowly builds itself over time, then tearing it apart each year is almost like destroying what nature spent the previous season creating. For this reason, many Amish farmers have developed a different approach to cultivation, one that relies less on machinery and more on simple, natural methods that protect soil structure and gradually improve soil fertility over time. So if they are not using rototillers, how do they prepare their soil for planting? Over generations, Amish communities have developed a gardening system that looks very different from the methods commonly used today, an approach focused on protecting and nurturing the soil rather than constantly disturbing it. Let's take a closer look at how this system works, and be sure to watch until the end, so you don't miss any of the methods Amish farmers use to care for their soil. Method 1. Deep mulching, the foundation of the system. One of the most important techniques used by many Amish gardeners is deep mulching, which simply means covering the soil surface with a thick layer of organic material. Unlike the thin decorative mulch often used in gardens, this method typically uses a layer about 4 to 6 inches thick. This depth creates a stable protective cover for the soil. The materials used are usually simple and easy to find, such as straw, shredded dry leaves, aged wood chips, dried grass, or plant residues. The key requirement is that these materials are rich in organic matter and able to slowly decompose over time. This thick mulch layer provides several important benefits for the soil. First, it blocks sunlight from reaching the soil surface. Many weed seeds require light to trigger germination. When the soil surface is shaded, the number of weeds that emerge can drop significantly. Second, the mulch layer acts as a natural insulation for the soil. It helps reduce evaporation, keeps the soil cooler during the summer, and stabilizes soil temperature. In many cases, a thick layer of straw mulch can significantly reduce the amount of irrigation needed during dry periods. Third, and perhaps most importantly, this mulch layer gradually becomes a food source for soil life. As the straw or dry leaves begin to decompose, soil microorganisms quickly multiply to process the organic material. At the same time, earthworms often pull small pieces of this material deeper into the soil, mixing it into the layers below. Over time, this process produces humus, a stable and nutrient-rich form of organic matter that improves soil structure and greatly enhances the soil's ability to hold moisture. However, when using deep mulching, there are a few practical points to keep in mind. During the first season, especially if the soil previously contained many dormant weed seeds, some weeds may still manage to push through the mulch layer. When that happens, the simplest solution is to remove them by hand and add another thin layer of mulch, usually about 1 inch thick. It is also important to keep mulch a few inches away from the base of plants, especially young seedlings, to prevent excessive moisture from accumulating around the stems. When maintained over several growing seasons, a thick organic mulch layer not only helps control weeds and conserve water, but also gradually improves the soil itself, creating an ideal environment for soil organisms to thrive. Method 2. The broad fork, loosening soil without destroying its structure. Even in a no-till gardening system, there are times when soil still needs to be loosened, especially in areas with heavy clay soil or ground that has become compacted after many years of cultivation. However, instead of using a rototiller to completely turn the soil over, many Amish farmers use a simple manual tool known as a broad fork. A broad fork consists of a horizontal bar with several long steel tines attached, along with 2 upright handles. The steel tines are usually 12 to 14 inches long, spaced about 3 to 4 inches apart, and spread across a working width of about 18 to 20 inches. This allows the gardener to loosen a fairly wide strip of soil with each movement. The way it works is simple. The gardener places the broad fork on the soil surface, steps on the crossbar to push the steel tines deep into the ground, and then gently pulls the handles back toward the body. This action lifts and loosens the soil, but unlike a rototiller, it does not flip or mix the soil layers. This small difference makes a huge impact on the soil ecosystem. When using a broad fork, the soil's natural structure remains largely intact. The topsoil, where most biological activity occurs, stays on top. Deeper layers remain undisturbed below. As a result, fungal networks are less likely to be destroyed, and the tunnels created by earthworms can continue functioning. These small underground channels play a critical role in allowing rainwater to move deeper into the soil and enabling plant roots to grow further down. Once the soil has been loosened, earthworms often move quickly into the newly opened spaces, expanding these channels and helping the soil remain well aerated over time. However, a broad fork works best when the soil is slightly moist, but not overly wet. If the soil is too dry, the steel tines may have difficulty penetrating deeply. If the soil is too wet, the soil structure may collapse and become compacted again after working it. In many small gardens, using a broad fork once in early spring before planting, and sometimes once again in late fall, is enough to maintain good soil structure without ever needing to rototill the entire garden. Method 3. Top dressing compost. Another notable difference in the way many Amish farmers manage their soil is how they use compost. In many modern gardens, compost is often mixed directly into the soil using a shovel or a rototiller. The idea is to move nutrients as quickly as possible into the root zone. But in this system, compost is usually spread directly on the soil surface rather than mixed into the soil. Typically, gardeners apply about 1 to 2 inches of compost each year across the surface of the planting beds. Afterward, the compost may be lightly covered with a protective mulch layer such as straw or dry leaves. What is interesting is that once compost is placed on the surface, nature does the rest of the work. Rainfall and irrigation gradually carry nutrients deeper into the soil, while earthworms pull organic material downward through their tunnels, helping distribute those nutrients throughout the soil. Fungal networks in the soil also participate in this process, transporting nutrients from the compost layer down to plant roots through their microscopic threads. In fact, this process is very similar to how natural forest ecosystems build fertile soil. In a forest, no one tills the soil to mix fallen leaves into the ground. Leaves simply fall onto the surface, slowly decompose, and are gradually pulled deeper into the soil by the organisms living there. Through this natural mechanism, nutrients are delivered into the soil slowly and steadily, while the soil structure remains intact instead of being disrupted the way it often is when compost is mechanically mixed into the soil. However, there are a few small things to keep in mind when applying this method. First, compost should be fully finished compost, no longer hot and without a strong odor. In addition, the compost should be spread evenly across the surface, rather than dumped in large piles, so soil organisms can process it more efficiently. Over time, applying compost in this way gradually increases the humus content of the soil, improves soil structure, and creates a stable environment for the soil ecosystem to thrive. Method 4. Cover crops. Another important part of this gardening system is the use of cover crops. Temporary plants grown to protect the soil when the main crops are not present. In many typical gardens, once the harvest is finished in late summer or fall, the soil is often left bare until the following spring. But for many Amish farmers, bare soil is almost never a good option. Exposed soil can easily lose nutrients, suffer erosion from heavy rain, and provide ideal conditions for weeds to take hold. Instead, Amish farmers often plant cover crops such as clover or vetch, legumes that fix nitrogen from the air and add fertility to the soil. Winter rye, a fast-growing grain that produces a large amount of biomass. Daikon radish, sometimes called tillage radish, whose long roots can penetrate 12 to 18 inches into the soil. These cover crops act as a natural protective layer for the soil during the cold season. Their roots help maintain soil structure and create small channels that improve water infiltration and airflow. At the same time, their leafy canopy covers the soil surface, reducing the chances of weed seeds germinating while the garden beds are resting. When spring arrives, these plants are usually cut down at the soil surface rather than pulled out. Their stems and leaves are left on top of the soil, forming a natural mulch layer. This method is often called chop and drop. As the plant material slowly decomposes, it continues adding organic matter to the soil while protecting the soil surface for the new growing season. In addition to these yearly soil building practices, there is another useful technique for anyone who wants to turn a lawn or abandoned patch of ground into a productive garden without tilling. Method 5. Converting new ground with sheet. Mulching, when transforming a lawn or unused piece of land into a garden, many Amish families use a simple technique known as sheet mulching, sometimes called lasagna gardening. This method allows gardeners to create new planting beds without ever tilling the soil. The process is straightforward. First, the area is mowed or cut as low as possible. The grass does not need to be removed. It will become part of the organic material that decomposes later. Next, the entire surface is covered with plain cardboard. This layer blocks sunlight, preventing the grass and weeds underneath from continuing to grow. The sheets are usually overlapped by about 4 to 6 inches to make sure no light slips through the gaps. After that, a layer of compost about 1 to 2 inches thick is spread on top. Then another layer of organic material, such as straw, dry leaves, or wood chips, is added, usually 4 to 6 inches deep. Once the materials are moistened by rain or irrigation, soil organisms such as bacteria, fungi, and earthworms begin breaking everything down. Within 2 to 4 months, the grass underneath dies, and the organic materials on top gradually transform into a new planting layer. When the growing season arrives, you simply open a small gap in the mulch and plant directly into the soil below. Over time, this method not only creates new planting beds, but also improves soil structure and increases humus content naturally. The results. After a few years, the most important factor in this system is time. Unlike rototilling, which creates immediate visual results, these methods improve the soil gradually over multiple growing seasons. During the first year, you may still see some weeds, especially if the soil previously contained a large number of dormant weed seeds. But after 1 or 2 growing seasons, many gardeners begin to notice clear changes. Weed pressure decreases significantly. The soil holds moisture better after rainfall, and the surface becomes softer and easier to work by hand. At the same time, earthworm populations and biological activity in the soil often increase noticeably. After several years, the soil usually becomes rich in humus, loose in texture, and structurally stable, allowing water to infiltrate quickly while still retaining the moisture plants need. At that point, the garden is not only easier to manage, it has become a healthy and self-sustaining soil ecosystem. The methods used by many Amish communities do not rely on complicated technology. Instead, they are based on a few simple principles: protect the soil, feed the soil, avoid destroying its natural structure. Work with the soil ecosystem instead of fighting against it. These methods may not be as fast as running a rototiller, but over time, they create a healthier, more stable, and far more sustainable soil system. And that may be the most important lesson we can learn from the way Amish farmers care for their land.